Okay, so Muhammad, I see that you've been dialed in, ready to go. I think you're. Let me just switch transition to get your picture up here, your beautiful LinkedIn face, and then your Twitter photo below that. Um, are you here? Can you hear me? Are we good to go?
Yes, we're good to go. I can hear you.
Yes, sir. Okay. Thank you. First of all, thank you so much for coming on. So people that have watched the show, they know I quoted this guy, your MTL broker. Well, I quoted him because Howard Marks quoted him. We talked about this gentleman on shooting from the hip number 7, and I'll link to that, but I'll also link to his Twitter, his little mini thread that was quoted. And I just want to just to get the record straight, so people know what we're talking about and know what kind of got you in this position with Howard Marks quoting you, and also you being quoted on CNBC. So huge congratulations to that as well. So I'm just going to wind the clocks a little bit back. And my first question to you, so I'll let you prepare a little bit, is how you would change this initial outlook, because obviously this was made. I believe it was covered in the March 31st memo. I think you made it around there a few days before that. So this was made almost about a month ago. And I'm just going to read it to the audience. And I'm actually going to put up the CNBC because I have the picture of it on CNBC here too, which is super cool that your Twitter handle's up there. But I'm just going to read it, and then I want to hear if you would revise anything about it, or update it anyway. So I'll start. So Muhammadraza, on your MTL broker on Twitter, he laid out. I don't know if you remember a month ago when we talked about this, he laid out the two cases, both extreme in both the positive direction and the negative direction, on what he sees could possibly happen. So let's start with the bull case. Everything opens in 6 weeks, so that's basically 2 weeks from now. But we're going to let him kind of edit. And he's not saying this would happen. He's just saying an extreme case on the positive side. But everything opens in 6 weeks. The unemployed can go back to the old jobs, or as true Americans bootstrap. Economy back to normal within 6 months. $2 trillion in private equity dry powder, low gas prices, and 0% interest rates pour fuel onto the economy. The roaring 20s mean the 2020s now. I love it. Here's the bear case, the negative case. Unemployment goes to 20+%. Everything does not go back to normal before at least a year or two. And in the meantime, there's a huge demand shock. The effects of the lockdown on businesses, as well as the oil shock, create depression-like conditions. And he concludes with this. He says, the contrast between these two cases is insane. I feel like one thing that will not change in either case is that large cap compounders will take on even steeper multiples, and maybe critical supply chains move back to the US. So, brother, any update to that? Has your outlook changed? What do you think, brother?
Yeah, so first of all, thanks for having me on. I'm really happy to be here.
Of
So
course.
to answer your question, back then when I tweeted that out, I was pretty confused. Now I'm just even more confused.
Yes.
So
I
I
first of
think,
all, can I just say I love that so many people are out here trying to give answers, and Howard Marks, sounds like you're a fan of him. He's always asking questions. He says we don't know the answer. There's so many things going around, we don't know the answer. So I love that you open up with you're even more confused than you were when you made this statement.
yep. So I'll say that I can just, there's about three things that can happen to the stock market. One is we test the lows again, the lows of March 23rd again. We go back to all-time highs, or the markets stay roughly stagnant from now for the till the end of the year. And I think that there is reasonable justification that can be given to every single one of these scenarios, which is what makes building out a prediction thesis very difficult. And it's already difficult enough to
Right.
predict what's going to happen to the broader economy. But then seeing this disconnect between the real economy and the stock market makes it almost impossible to predict how stocks are going to do. Um, Now, what I would change um, about that little thread that Howard Marks quoted was, I think the bull thesis is getting got weaker and the bear thesis actually got stronger. But what's
Wow.
curious is that the stock market went in the exact opposite direction, which is what's confusing. Obviously, it doesn't seem like we're going to be, any Western economy is going to be um, opening up its economy anytime soon. Though I do want to make a nuance there. I know Germany's weakened or loosened some of its restrictions, but and people are now free to go out and shop, to go to stores, go to entertainment, um, but that's not what's happening. And the Germany is supposed to be coming out with its GDP forecast next week, and most experts are saying GDP is going to be down 6-7%. And the fact that shop people aren't going out and shopping, that makes sense to me because that's what happens in recessions. People are afraid of losing their jobs. They're afraid um, of being caught in a credit crunch. They're afraid of not having enough money. So what do they do in that case? They start saving money as much as possible, and that's great for individual balance sheets. But the counter effect of that is that the economy sees less spending. So there's a lot of the bull thesis that relied on there being a lot of pent up demand, but I don't think that that's accurate anymore. I think that even if the economy were to open up tomorrow morning, there's a lot of damage that's still to be seen,
Right.
especially in the US where 70% of the GDP is reliant on consumer spending.
Right. Yeah, there's this notion that okay, the government can open things up, right? But then there's this notion of when do individuals feel that they are ready to go out and shop, which are two completely different things. It's not the government's timeline. It's every single American or every single citizen of every single country in their own house making the decision on what they're going to do with the dollars in their wallet, which is a whole nother thing that who how do we know each individual is going to act. So you mentioned that you're even more confused than you were when you initially made these statements. Now I'm going to take a shot in the dark because one of my biggest and we've talked about this on the show, one of my biggest pieces of the thing that I'm wondering and the thing that I don't understand because we've never been in this territory before is the action from the central banks. Now, particularly in the U.S., I've been more focused on. But is this kind of the money that they're pumping in, especially with this purchasing of junk bonds? Now, your average American doesn't own a junk bond, right? Now, they may rely on pensions that own these junk bonds, or they may rely, but your average American doesn't own junk bonds. It's mostly, I mean, it's an investment vehicle for experts in finance, for lack of a better term. So it's just, and I think a lot of people saw this whole thing of okay, the Fed is now buying junk bonds. Where are we? So is that where your confusion's coming from? The central bank actions and how that's changing how the companies are valued in the equity markets, or where is your source of confusion coming from?
There's a lot of sources of confusion. Low interest rates are one of them, and how I'm thinking of that. But we can touch on that later. To answer your question about the Fed, um, there's a lot of things you can analyze in the Fed actions, but I'm just not 100% sure that the Fed's actions will be effective because it seems that they're pumping a lot of money into the banks so that the banks are engaged and motivated to give out loans. Because what happens if banks start being afraid is that they stop giving out loans. People stop buying houses, they stop starting new businesses, companies start issuing less debt, so their the amplitude of their operations comes down. And we saw in 2008 and 9 that the central bank was slow in trying to prevent this credit crunch from happening.
Right.
And now but now they seem to have acted very proactively and extremely quickly, which is probably a good thing. That there won't be a credit crunch. That being said, I think that the economy is facing a very different issue than it was in 2008. There may be some similarities, like maybe the over financialization of the economy, but here it's the consumer. It's at the micro level um, that consumers are being impacted. In 2008 and 9, GDP was down only about 2%. Yes, the risk of people defaulting on their mortgages has been spread around a lot by the banks, but the consumer was still fine. Unemployment had not reached anywhere even near current levels. So I'm just not sure that it's. I don't think it's a bad thing that the Fed is trying to prevent a credit crunch and adding as much liquidity in the economy. Though you can discuss for a long time if it creates bad incentives, but I'm just not sure that that the individual consumer is being protected enough, um, and how the consumer is going to fare coming out of this lockdown.
Right, totally. So just to touch a little bit more on that, creating the wrong incentives. A lot of a, even before COVID-19, before this pandemic, there were talks of people, attacking the managerial class in boardrooms across America, and with their emphasis on, while at the same time increasing the debt on their company's balance sheets, they were also buying back their own shares. Now, I think people, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think people, misunderstand that share buybacks are actually a way to, they're not a bad thing. They're not a bad thing. They're a way to give capital back to shareholders. And who's a shareholder? Basically everyone with a 401k account, anyone that's ever purchased a stock, anyone with an individual retirement account in the US, you're a shareholder. This is the money going back to you. Where I think it gets a little weird is when at the same time these companies are raising debt, they're also buying back their own shares to increase things like earnings per share, and then thus increase their own, potentially their own compensation of CEOs. So this is a big concern, and a concern before the crisis. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on this.
Yeah, about share buybacks. I'm not necessarily against them. I do think they're a tool that can be used for shareholder good, for long-term shareholder value creation, but they can also be a tool of destruction of value. Um, I, I just I'm not sure what the right answer is. I don't think the government should step in and start telling companies, yeah, you can't start buying back your stock, because it can
Right.
be a very valuable tool. If the company finds that its shares are trading at a deep discount to intrinsic value, they absolutely should be allowed to buy back their shares. Just that in the hands of certain management personnel, it can be a tool of destruction, and certainly for many companies, it has been a tool of destruction. The thing is, for the airlines, you have to invert, and think of the alternative. What would have happened if all these companies had a bunch of cash just laying on their balance sheet? I think it's very likely that activists would have stepped in, then forced the company to buy back shares or do something dumb with that cash. So
Right.
I agree. I absolutely agree um, that share buybacks can be used negatively, but it's difficult. It's difficult for me to say, oh, there's something here very clear that should be done about buybacks. It's really in the hands um, of each company. What I'm doing as a shareholder there is I care a lot about value creation. So if I see a company engaging in value destructive buybacks, I'm just going to stay away from them.
Right. I appreciate you sharing that. Now, are you having a moment, and you're closer to this stuff than me. You're buying individual shares in companies and all that. But are you having a moment right now at all where you're worried about the dynamism that has made capitalism successful for so long? Do you feel that we're kind of at a crossroads right now, or is that blowing this up too much? Is this something? I'm an optimist at heart. I think we're going to get through this. I think things are going to be okay. I think we're going to be better off in 100 years, 50 years, 40 years. But that doesn't mean we can't ask questions. That doesn't mean we can't steer the ship so that bad things don't get worse. So I'm curious if you think this is some kind of crossroads moment, and you're worried about what capitalism is going to look like in 10 years. You're worried that these companies that know that if shit really hits the fan, so long as it's spread enough across enough companies, then we will get bailed out by the Fed or with stimulus. Is that something you're worried about, or is that something a little chicken little sky is falling stuff that doesn't keep you up at night?
Yeah, I'm definitely a bit worried about that, but I think that being said, I want to be careful with my choice of words, because capitalism itself is very. I see it as this very pure economic theory. I look at capitalism of Adam Smith by reading Wealth of Nations. And then I read the Communist Manifesto by Karl Marx. And when I look at the current economic system, I think Karl Marx would be seeing a lot more similarities with what he wanted in an economy than Adam Smith would. So capitalism itself, I think, is pure, and nothing can change that. That being said, I agree with you. I do think that there's a lot of bad incentives being built in. There's the Fed buying, for example, all these um, uh, they started buying junk bonds, whereas before they were holding themselves just to investment grade bonds.
Right.
And then there's talk about if equities go back down, then they might start buying ETFs or individual companies' common shares, which is which I think that would be
Which
pretty alarming.
which Japan
Because
has been
they're
doing.
exactly that's exactly what Japan's been like, and I do think that the odds of the U.S. having a bit of a Japan-like situation does seem somewhat likely. I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm not making any
Right.
predictions.
Right.
But I think that we should be able to entertain that scenario. I mean, Japan has been a deflationary environment for the past 25 plus years, despite record money printing by the central bank. Um, the financial markets are pretty much nationalized, with the central bank buying junk bond, investment grade bonds, also junk bonds, and also equities. I think it does seem likely that that the U.S. maybe does something like that. Yes,
Right
and that
on.
is indeed a very worrying thought.
Right. Right. Um, uh, is there something, if that is a worry? I'm curious, and I do want to ask you about, because constantly I talk about it on this show. So I'd love to have someone who's basically focused on individual stocks and finding the needles in the haystack. I constantly talk about just index investing on this show, and just for the vast majority of people, buy the index, fall asleep, wake up in 40 years a millionaire. That's kind of my take, because if you look at the actively managed funds, a lot of them don't beat the market over the long term. The likelihood you beat the market over the long term decreases for every year the fund is active. So I'm curious, as a I don't know if you call yourself you're an investor. As an investor, what are the types of moves that you could, I don't want to say necessarily hedge, but that you could make to possibly benefit off of a situation where you know uh, where your fears of the U.S. Getting itself in a Japan-like situation? Is there a way to protect against that with simple equity trading, or is it something that you got to buy gold or Bitcoin or something like that?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a tricky question about how to hedge against that, and I don't think it's us going to Japan-like situation. It's too early to tell whether it's high probability.
Right.
So it's difficult to tell you how I'm going to hedge against something that I think right now is low probability, but I'll tell you what I'm doing with my portfolio right now. I've always been a fan of high quality companies, companies that can compound capital at a very high rate every single year for a long time, that are kept in place by strong competitive advantages, preferably by regulation. And what I'm doing right now, and I do think that I tweeted about that in that little thread that Howard Marks quoted.
Right.
I do think that these companies right now, they're trading at high multiples, 30, 35 multiples, but as long as rates stay low, and they might even go negative as soon as next week, I think there's a very real possibility that we see these companies trading at 40, 45 times
Wow.
multiples. Um, it's worrying. It goes against everything I was taught as an investor, but I do think it's a real possibility. But what I'm doing to hedge right now is I have right now about 40% of my portfolio just there in cash, and I'm just waiting, sort of. I feel like I have kind of a gun with the trigger ready. Like
Right.
the gun's full of cash, and then if the market drops again, I'll start buying um, my favorite companies that can compound capital at a very high rate. That's what I'm doing. I think a lot of big investors, I think, are also very confused and also have a very high cash position. Like, look at Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger at Berkshire. Charlie Munger had an interview with the Wall Street Journal last week, and he was saying how he's also quite confused right now. He doesn't know what the market's going to do. But Berkshire's cash balance, I think, is almost 30% of their market cap.
Right.
Carl Icahn this morning was saying he's raising cash. He's short commercial buildings. David Tepper is also a bit confused. Um, so you see all these big investors with high cash positions who are similarly confused, and that's the situation that I've also that's the position that I've also taken.
Right on. And I'm curious what you think of the fact that I saw this tweeted out. Um, a few days ago that the five biggest stocks in the S&P 500 have a weighting equal to the bottom 350 stocks, and this is up from 282, the bottom 282 stocks in July 2018. Does that tell us something? Is that an important thing to look at? What does that make you think?
So I think, yeah, it's interesting, and yeah, the closest period I saw a comparison like that made that the five biggest companies of the S&P and of the Nasdaq made up 20% of the overall index, and that was also a similar situation as 2000 at the height of the dot-com bubble. The thing is, back then interest rates were much higher, something like in the 3 or 4% range, if I'm not mistaken. It might be a bit different, but they most certainly were not at zero, and they weren't on the way to going negative. So, and that's another confusing part. If interest rates were at 2 or 3%, I could tell you, yeah, we're in a bubble right now. There's no way these valuations of publicly traded equities are justified. We're going down. There's no way we can stay at these levels. But that's the thing is, there's a lot of capital right now in the world from institutional investors, pension funds. Where's that money going to go? They need to get high returns to pay out pensions for their
Right.
how do you say the people who are depositing money within the pensions.
Totally.
Interest rates are at zero. Where is that money going to go apart from equities? Where are they going to get those high returns? I'm just not sure. So it's difficult for me to say, yeah, this is just as alarming as 2000. It would be if interest rates weren't this low.
Right. Um, uh, so I love asking the question. I asked the last question. I think you heard. For people for people I have on the show, is there something the Wall Street Journals, the New York Times, the CNBCs of the world are getting wrong in talking about this narrative? Is there something that you're seeing, that you're reading, that you say, that a lot of that's getting clicks, that's getting reads, that a lot of people are repeating on, whether it be cable news or in the newspapers, that you think is wrong, that you think needs to be addressed, and that you wish more people understood was wrong?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think the market and all these mainstream financial news networks, I don't think they're doing a good enough job at highlighting a very fundamental truth of the markets, and that's that belief drives capital flows. Um, and that's what we saw in 2007, 8, and 9. That yes, the mortgage market was not in good condition, and delinquency rates had reached very high levels, something around 8%, but yet the mortgage market didn't collapse until investor sentiment had completely turned around. Um, and so that took at least a good 6 months for the mortgage market to collapse because consumer sentiment had stayed positive for so long. So I think that as long as consumer sentiment, as the sentiment of investors doesn't change, I don't think we can test the lows. That being said, I think that there's a lot that could change consumer sentiment very quickly. Like some examples, the large tech companies, which many of these tech companies are part of those big five of the indices. They're reporting earnings this week.
Right.
They perform badly. Maybe the market's not going to like that at all. Um, there's that. There's the fact that they're saying there's a lot of pent up demand right now. A lot of the financial news networks are saying that. But how about the fact that maybe there won't even be enough supply to deliver on this demand? There's a lot of stories breaking about a lot of the meat plants in the U.S.
Right.
being contaminated. What if the U.S. can't deliver meat to people? That there's a lot of construction has come almost grinding to a halt. What happens if people want to buy houses? There isn't enough construction to answer to demand. So even if companies want to sell houses or food, they might not be able to. So I think there's a lot of things that could trigger consumer sentiment going south, and I don't think the market's pricing that in, and I don't think that the mainstream news is talking about that enough.
Got it. Well, as I've read, never bet against the Fed. So I wonder if if, as you say, those things come to pass, if the Fed will come in and prop things up again. So I want you to get your buying opportunity, brother, but I also want to make sure that I want to hopefully we get through this, and your average person's you're doing okay through this. And we get out of it as soon as possible and open up this economy as soon as possible. Economy around the world, everywhere. What one final thing, I'm curious, because I talk a lot about index investing on the show, and I'm curious what your thoughts are. As I said, my position is for your average American, your average citizen anywhere in the world, really just buy an index fund, and just and let it ride. I'm curious. How do you feel about that as someone that is, I think by definition, attempting to beat the market by picking winners and selling losers? So I'm curious what you say when people just bring up index investing, or how you personally feel about it.
Yeah, it's a very good question. First, there's a nuance I want to make. If you're talking about American indices like the S&P 500, the Nasdaq, the Dow Jones, then I
Yes.
think that's a great strategy. I
Yeah.
don't think
Totally.
the entire world's indices are in great condition. For example, I live in Canada, and the TSX index at the March lows was trading roughly where it was in 2000. So you had
Wow.
like 20 years of just a zero return.
Right.
But for the purpose of my argument, I'm gonna stick to the assumption that an investor wants to invest in American indices.
Yes.
I think that yeah, that's probably a good strategy for the average investor, and just because I realize by investing, by researching companies and industries, how extraordinarily difficult investing is. It's probably one of the most difficult arts in the world. And
Absolutely.
unless you're willing to dedicate a big chunk of your life to it, it's almost impossible. And even if you do dedicate a big portion of your life towards becoming a good investor, it's extremely difficult to reach that point where you're beating the markets. Um, because a part of the difficulty behind that is when you're investing in a company, it's nice to know that they've performed well the past 10 years, but what are the next 10 years going to look like?
Right.
And that's extremely difficult to predict. And I'll be honest with you, I've been investing for 4 years. I've beat the market in only 1 year. I wouldn't say right now that I'm a great investor or even a good investor. I'm just hoping to reach that point sometime in my life, and I'd be happy with that. The reason I invest isn't just to beat the markets. It goes beyond money. I find it's about learning something new. It's about playing this really wonderful game. It's about achieving something really great. That's something that very few will ever achieve. So it goes beyond money. If my motivation was just beating the markets, I would also just sit back and maybe just put my money in an index, but I most certainly wouldn't be picking individual stocks.
Right. Absolutely. I love how humble you are. I love that you're not making declarations. You're asking the right questions. So Muhammadraza, I really appreciate you coming on. If you guys want to follow this guy on Twitter, your MTL broker. He is. You can see him on the stream there. You can see his Twitter right there. So, brother, thank you so much for coming on. I look forward to following you and following your analysis, and I hope we can talk again. And yeah, thank you so much, and best of luck.
For sure. Thank you so much for having me on. All the
Okay,
best.
brother. Okay, brother. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Okay, that was Muhammadraza Panju.